Hey, it's starting to look like Santino does all the work around here, so I figured I'd actually pick up some slack and do a sci-fi review. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen the Paul Verhoeven movie Starship Troopers, but I'm actually going to be kicking it old school and talking about the novel from 1959 by Robert Heinlein. Just a few misconceptions get out of the way first of all. The book is not about Mormons. I don't know where people get that impression. The movie, there's a single scene talking about a Mormon space fort that gets destroyed by arachnids, and suddenly Starship Troopers is Mormon space epics. I don't know where that comes from. Secondly, Paul Verhoeven didn't even read all of Starship Troopers, and there are actually rumors that he'd started production on a different project, that they renamed Starship Troopers for brand recognition. So don't be expecting the book to be anything like the movie or its direct-to-video sequels, even though, of course, there are shout-outs and like some base similarities, like the name of the planet Klendathu, stuff like that. Let me just say this book is not what most people are going to expect. It's not a space opera, and it's not a war book. Essentially, Heinlein had an idea of what the military in the future was going to be like, and he wrote a book about it. Just like in the real military, there's a lot more time spent between battles than on the actual action itself. A large chunk of the book is also spent in boot camp, explaining how the soldiers of tomorrow are trained, and actually comes across as kind of a standard boot camp scene. The War of the Bugs is an important device, and it allows us to see how the mobile infantry, which is what he calls the military, how it works in the field, but it's not actually the central point of the story. In fact, the only description we even get of the bugs is that they're like giant spiders, but not. And besides explaining how the future military works, a good chunk of the story is spent talking about Heinlein's future utopia as well, through the character's experiences in his history and moral philosophy class. These sections are basically structured like Platonic philosophy, a teacher figure going on long diatribes with questions that advance his points scattered throughout. These sections make some interesting points, but do not advance the story and have little effect on it, and they're really just Heinlein's view on philosophy and militarism. Now, it sounds like I've described a very boring book, but it's actually quite captivating. Heinlein is one of the three masters of science fiction, along with Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov, and so it really is a very good read. I could barely put it down. And the main character, Johnny, who is Filipino, surprisingly. In the movie, he is from South America. He's a bit two-dimensional, but it's a milieu piece. It's not about the characters. It's not about, the individual people. It takes a very bland character who's the stereotypical person and then allows him to experience the world and see what it's like. And so he does that well, and you really get to see how the world works, even if you don't really understand the character himself. It's also interesting to note how groundbreaking this book was. I mean, Starship Trooper invented several things that we take for granted now, like power armor is one, which we see in all sorts of media, from Halo to Iron Man. The concept of bug-type alien races, whose strength lies in numbers, can be found in Aliens, Warhammer 40k, StarCraft, and even Halo again. Even the concept of Space Marines, that is a military force who drop traditional soldiers onto a planet instead of just attacking from orbit, is born and justified here. Several large franchises that enjoy great popularity actually owe their success to tropes that are born from Heinlein's work. He even predicts several real-world phenomena, including, but not limited to, the concept of an all-volunteer army, which is unthinkable considering Starship Troopers was written while most militaries still used conscript armies, including the United States. Now, this next bit is going to be a bit super nerd, but it needs to be addressed. Well, I'm not sure if the opinions expressed by Heinlein in the novel actually reflect his own, though there's strong indications they do. There are several fundamental assumptions he makes that aren't necessarily true. First of all, he says that humans have no preferences or morals in common with other people beyond a will to survive. This is called atomism, and while it is a popular conception of mankind, it is important to note that it is not universally accepted. There are actually many philosophers and social scientists who argue what is called a sui generis social reality, which means that culture you were raised in has an effect on your preferences and morals, or in other words, your society can change who you are fundamentally, more than just on a cosmetic level. In addition, Heinlein tends to use a lot of strawman tactics when discussing philosophies that differ from those in the novel. Also, the notion of a mathematical system of morals is either ridiculous or a little bit frightening, depending on how much you know about turn-of-the-century modernity and eugenics. In his defense, though, his portrayal of the people seems pretty legit. Some people say that his portrayal of men who've killed in combat is unrealistic because Johnny and other soldiers don't seem to be affected by it, but I would say that fighting a race of spider-looking bugs is a lot different from fighting and killing an actual human, so I'll give him a pass on not saying that people are super traumatized by that. Alright, so long story short, is it worth the read? It's a good book, and it's the first science fiction book on the recommended reading list for the Marine Corps and the Navy, so it does have some merit. But at the same time, it's not an action book. It's definitely a milieu piece exploring, I'm butchering that word, exploring how a futuristic military would work and what a future society will be like, so don't go expecting endless scenes of violence and warfare. I give it an A, based mostly because it's one of the originals, and so much of what we see today in sci-fi is based on concepts developed here. But if I was forced to judge it on its own merits, I would probably give it a B. I mean, it's still a great story, but it was definitely written in 1959, and it may not be as interesting for someone who isn't a sociological nerd like myself. But still, I would definitely recommend reading it.